The sun hung like a molten coin over the desolate western town of Ash Hollow, where dust moved like breath through the lifeless streets. Heat waves shimmered off tin roofs and cracked windows. The townsfolk had gathered in front of the gallows, not because justice was being served, but because a spectacle had been promised. At the center of the square, bound at the wrists and ankles, stood a young Apache woman. Her name, though no one bothered to ask, was Ayanna. Her long black hair clung to her sweat-damp neck. A bruise bloomed purple across her jaw, and dried blood streaked one side of her forehead. She had not cried. Not when they dragged her into town. Not when they spit on her. Not even when they tied the rope around her neck. She stole a horse. Someone in the crowd whispered, though no one saw her do it. "She's one of them," another hissed. "That's enough." There had been no trial, no evidence, no defense. Just a deputy's word, and a frightened merchant claiming his stall had been looted. They said it didn't matter what she had done, it only mattered what she was, Apache in Ash Hollow. That meant death. The sheriff stood tall on the platform, sweat glistening on his brow as he scanned the restless crowd. "We don't take kindly to savages round here," he called out, voice loud and stern. "This one here was caught sneaking around near the Jenkins barn. Folks say she's been stealing. Could be scouting for a war party." The crowd muttered its agreement, some with snarling grins, others silent but complicit. Mothers held their children close. Old men squinted through the heat. A few looked away, unsure, but none dared speak. Ayanna lifted her chin and looked out over the crowd. Her dark eyes scanned them, not with fear, but with a quiet defiance. The same courage her mother had taught her when she was 5 and watched soldiers burn their camp. The same steel she'd carried when she buried her brother with her bare hands. She had walked alone for days. Not to steal, not to scout, but to find water, to find safety. She found this instead. A boy in the crowd threw a stone. It struck her shoulder. She flinched, but didn't lower her gaze. "Let's get this over with," the sheriff muttered. The hangman adjusted the rope, and the platform creaked. But just as the sheriff raised his hand, a sound rose, slow and steady, the clopping of hooves on hard-packed earth. All heads turned as a single horse and rider came into view from the far end of town. Dust rising behind him like a phantom, he rode a black stallion, tall and proud, its mane tossing in the wind. The rider wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face, a long coat trailing behind him like shadow. The townsfolk recognized him before they could even see his eyes. Eli Cutter, the rancher who hadn't spoken in nearly 7 years. The man whose family was killed in a border raid by Apache raiders. The man who buried his wife and son beneath a willow tree and never looked back. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Why's he here? He hates them more than any of us. He hasn't come into town since the war." Eli dismounted slowly, boots crunching in the dust. His face was calm, unreadable, weather-beaten. The sheriff frowned, confused. "This ain't your concern, Cutter." But Eli didn't answer. He didn't look at the sheriff. He looked only at Ayanna. Their eyes met, a brief, frozen moment. In time, she stared at him with a mixture of confusion and recognition. Not because she knew him, but because something in his gaze said he understood. Her pain, her silence, her fight to live, and something deeper, a quiet refusal to let another innocent person die for sins they didn't commit. Eli stepped forward. Toward the gallows, toward the noose. The crowd shifted, the sheriff's hand twitched near his holster, and still, the silent rancher said nothing, but something was about to change. Forever. The crowd parted slowly, as Eli Cutter moved through it, silent as dusk. Every bootstep echoed against wood and dust, heavier than the next. The noose above Ayanna's head swayed slightly in the breeze, creaking in rhythm with the tension that now held the entire town hostage. No one spoke. Even the sheriff, who moments earlier was ready to give the order, stood frozen in place, unsure how to handle the sudden arrival of a man whose silence had once been mistaken for indifference. Eli didn't look at the crowd. He didn't need to. His presence alone had unsettled them. Men who once rode with him in cattle drives now looked away. Women clutched their children. The preacher, who had been mumbling half-hearted prayers at the gallows, stepped back with a stammer. The sheriff straightened his spine and tried to find his voice. "Eli," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "we know what they did to your family. You more than anyone should understand what she is. You really want to stand in the way of justice?" Still, Eli said nothing. Instead, he turned toward the scaffold, then looked up at Ayanna. She stood tall, despite the rope around her neck, but her chest heaved, not in fear, but in disbelief. Why would a white man defend her? Why this man? Eli slowly reached down and unbuckled the strap holding his rifle against his back. He didn't raise it, he didn't need to. He simply held it, loosely but deliberately, both hands resting on the stock. That's when the whispers started again. "He's not going to let this happen, he'll shoot. Hell, maybe he's finally gone mad." The sheriff scowled. "You draw that rifle, Eli, and it's you against all of Ash Hollow. You'll be remembered as the man who defended a savage." Eli's gaze finally met the sheriff's. Not angry, not even hostile. just firm, solid, as the rocks out in the canyons. For the first time in years, he spoke, one quiet, raspy word. No. The word dropped into the crowd like thunder. Ayanna flinched. The townspeople gasped. The sheriff's jaw clenched tight. Eli Cutter had broken his silence. He took one step closer to the scaffold. I saw her last night, he continued, voice like dry wind over bone. She was trying to drink from the creek behind my land. Had no horse, no weapon, just a canteen. And a torn satchel, didn't say a word. She ain't here for war. The sheriff squinted, defiant. You sayin' she's innocent? I'm sayin' this rope don't belong on her neck. A long silence followed. The preacher looked uneasy. A mother whispered something to her child and turned to leave. One of the older ranch hands, a man who'd lost a brother in an Apache raid, lowered his rifle. Another followed. The sheriff looked around and realized the support he'd assumed was solid had begun to crumble. Damn it, Eli ... You think you can just walk in here after 7 years? And Eli raised his rifle slowly, deliberately, and pointed it at the noose above Ayanna's head. Not at the sheriff, not at the crowd, but at the knot that held her between life and death. Cut her down, Eli said, or I'll do it myself. No one moved. The wind picked up, swirling dust around the wooden scaffold, making it groan. Then, the deputy, a thin, nervous man, climbed the platform. His hands shook as he reached for the rope. The sheriff shouted, "Don't you dare!" But the deputy cut it anyway. The rope fell. Ayanna stumbled forward, off the trapdoor, gasping for breath as her legs buckled. Eli stepped forward and caught her before she could fall. He looked back once at the crowd. No one met his eyes. Then, with the Apache girl leaning against him, Eli helped her down the steps. He didn't look back again, didn't need to. The message had been sent, and the spell of mob hatred had been broken by one man's silent stand. And now, Ash Hollow would never be the same. The crowd parted slowly as Eli Cutter moved through it, silent as dusk. Every bootstep echoed against wood and dust, heavier than the next. The noose above Ayanna's head swayed slightly in the breeze, creaking in rhythm with the tension that now held the entire town hostage. No one spoke. Even the sheriff, who moments earlier was ready to give the order, stood frozen in place, unsure how to handle the sudden arrival of a man whose silence had once been mistaken for indifference. Eli didn't look at the crowd. He didn't need to. His presence alone had unsettled them. Men who once rode with him in cattle drives now looked away. Women clutched their children. The preacher, who had been mumbling half-hearted prayers at the gallows, stepped back with a stammer. The sheriff straightened his spine and tried to find his voice. "Eli," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "we know what they did to your family. You more than anyone should understand what she is. You really want to stand in the way of justice?" Still, Eli said nothing. Instead, he turned toward the scaffold, then looked up at Ayanna. She stood tall, despite the rope around her neck, but her chest heaved, not in fear, but in disbelief. Why would a white man defend her? Why this man? Eli slowly reached down and unbuckled the strap holding his rifle against his back. He didn't raise it, he didn't need to. He simply held it, loosely but deliberately, both hands resting on the stock. That's when the whispers started again. "He's not going to let this happen, ... he'll shoot. Hell, maybe he's finally gone mad." The sheriff scowled. "You draw that rifle, Eli, and it's you against all of Ash Hollow. You'll be remembered as the man who defended a savage." Eli's gaze finally met the sheriff's. Not angry, not even hostile, just firm, solid, as the rocks out in the canyons. For the first time in years, he spoke, one quiet, raspy word. No. The word dropped into the crowd like thunder. Ayanna flinched. The townspeople gasped. The sheriff's jaw clenched tight. Eli Cutter had broken his silence. He took one step closer to the scaffold. "I saw her last night," he continued, voice like dry wind over bone. "She was trying to drink from the creek behind my land. Had no horse, no weapon, just a canteen. And a torn satchel, didn't say a word. She ain't here for war." The sheriff squinted, defiant. "You sayin' she's innocent? I'm sayin' this rope don't belong on her neck." A long silence followed. The preacher looked uneasy. A mother whispered something to her child and turned to leave. One of the older ranch hands, a man who'd lost a brother in an Apache raid, lowered his rifle. Another followed. The sheriff looked around and realized the support he'd assumed was solid had begun to crumble. "Damn it, Eli ... You think you can just walk in here after 7 years?" And Eli raised his rifle slowly, deliberately, and pointed it at the noose above Ayanna's head. Not at the sheriff, not at the crowd, but at the knot that held her between life and death. "Cut her down," Eli said, "or I'll do it myself." No one moved. The wind picked up, swirling dust around the wooden scaffold, making it groan. Then, the deputy, a thin, nervous man, climbed the platform. His hands shook as he reached for the rope. The sheriff shouted, "Don't you dare!" But the deputy cut it anyway. The rope fell. Ayanna stumbled forward, off the trapdoor, gasping for breath as her legs buckled. Eli stepped forward and caught her before she could fall. He looked back once at the crowd. No one met his eyes. Then, with the Apache girl leaning against him, Eli helped her down the steps. He didn't look back again, didn't need to. The message had been sent, and the spell of mob hatred had been broken by one man's silent stand. And now, Ash Hollow would never be the same. The prairie night fell heavy, blanketing Eli Cutter's land in a silence that wasn't quite peace. Inside the cabin, a small fire crackled now in the hearth. Ayanna sat wrapped in the blanket he had given her, legs folded beneath her on the worn wooden floor. The firelight danced across her bruised face, softening what the town had tried to harden. Eli stood by the window, watching the black horizon. He could still feel the weight of Ash Hollow's stairs burning into his back. He knew what it meant to step between a noose and a native. He'd crossed a line most men wouldn't even walk near. And yet, the feeling that had settled over him wasn't regret, it was something else. Like smoke rising from long-dead embers. Behind him, Ayanna spoke. "You're not afraid they'll come for you." Eli turned slowly, his face half-lit by firelight. Let him, it wasn't bravado, just truth. The same truth that made him step up to the gallows. Something inside him had already died when he buried his family. He wasn't afraid of much anymore. Ayanna studied him in silence. "You said you hated everything," she said. "Did that include people like me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the mantel and picked up the faded photograph. The woman's smile was soft, the boy's wild with joy. Both gone now. Taken in a fire. The kind that leaves nothing behind but blackened wood and questions no one wants to answer. "They told me it was Apache raiders," Eli finally said. "But I never saw them. I came back from town and it was just smoke. No faces, no trail. Just fire." Ayanna's voice was steady. "You believed them." "I had to," Eli said. "I needed someone to blame." She looked down at her hands. "My brother was shot by settlers last winter, just 13. He was hunting rabbits." Eli's eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The fire popped quietly between them. "That's the truth of this land," Ayanna said softly. "Everyone's bleeding, and no one knows who started it." Eli nodded. Or they stopped caring. He poured 2 mugs of coffee from a blackened kettle and handed one to her. She took it cautiously, the warmth of the tin a comfort against the night chill. Outside, the coyotes cried in the distance long mournful howls that seemed to echo the sorrow neither of them could voice. Ayanna sipped carefully, then looked at him. "Why did you speak for me? A stranger, one they told you to hate." He sat across from her, resting the mug between his palms. "Because hate didn't bring my family back," he said, "and silence didn't give me peace." He stared into the flames, but standing there, hearing them cheer to hang a girl just because of her blood, it was like watching the same fire all over again, just in a different form. For a moment, Ayanna's face softened, the knot in her throat loosened. Not because she fully trusted him yet, but because she could hear the fracture in his voice. She recognized it, the sound of someone who had carried grief too long. "You don't owe me anything," she said quietly. "No," Eli said, "but I owe someone something. Maybe I've owed it for years." They sat like that, both wrapped in a silence that no longer felt hostile. Outside, the prairie wind swept over Eli's land like a whisper through tall grass. The stars above were thick and sharp, clear in the cloudless night, too beautiful to belong to a world so full of pain. After a long while, Ayanna spoke again. "They'll come. The townsfolk, maybe even soldiers." "I know," he said, "and you'd still stand in their way." Eli looked her dead in the eye. "If I didn't, I'd still be a coward. And I've been one long enough." Her gaze lingered on him, measuring him, maybe even understanding him, and she nodded. That night, they didn't sleep much. Eli sat by the door, rifle across his lap. Ayanna rested near the fire, half dozing, half listening to the wind. And, somewhere out there, in the darkness, men were stirring. Plans were being made. Revenge was being whispered. But in a lonely cabin on the edge of the frontier, 2 broken souls had begun to stitch something back together. Not love, not yet, but something just as rare. Trust. The wind shifted just before sunrise. Eli Cutter had been sitting by the door since midnight, rifle balanced across his lap, boots planted firm on the floor. His eyes were tired, but he'd learned how to rest without sleep long ago. Beside the fire, Ayanna stirred beneath the blanket, still fragile, but stronger than when she'd first stumbled into his life. He felt it before he heard it, a tension in the air, the kind that came before storms, before ambushes, before the breaking of something sacred. Then came the sound, faint hoofbeats, distant but closing. Eli rose slowly, crossed to the window, and looked east. Dusk curled on the horizon. Triders, 6 or 7 men, maybe more. Townmen, no doubt. The kind who sharpened their courage with liquor and carried justice in their holsters. He didn't flinch, just picked up his rifle and walked to the fire. Ayanna sat up, eyes alert, instinct already guiding her. "They're coming," he said. She nodded once. No fear on her face now, just awareness. She'd been hunted before. Eli opened the cabinet by the hearth and pulled out a second rifle shorter lighter. He offered it to her without a word. She hesitated, then took it, checking the chamber, her hands steady, despite the tremor in her voice when she finally said, "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," he answered, eyes fixed on the window. "You're under my roof now." They stepped outside into the cool dawn air. The prairie grasses bent gently in the wind. The land was quiet, except for the thunder of hooves, growing louder. Aiyana climbed the slope behind the cabin and took cover in the rocks. She understood if there was going to be shooting, she needed to be out of direct sight. But Eli remained, in plain view, standing in front of his cabin, rifle resting across one arm, hat shadowing his eyes. The riders came fast and hard, pulling their horses to a halt about 30 yards out. Their leader was the Sheriff Clay Morton, leaning forward in the saddle, face red with anger, and more importantly, embarrassment. "You got a lot of nerve, Cutter," he shouted, "sheltering a savage in your own home after what she'd done." Eli didn't answer. "She's a danger to this town," the sheriff barked, spitting in the dirt. "You know it. You knew it when you dragged her down off that rope." Still, Eli said nothing. One of the younger deputies raised his rifle. "We ain't here to talk long, Cutter. Send her out and we leave in peace." Eli took one slow step forward. "You leave now," he said calmly, "and no one dies." The men shifted nervously in their saddles. This wasn't what they expected. Eli Cutter, the ghost of Ash Hollow, was supposed to be broken, quiet, lost in his grief, not standing firm like stone. "She's an Apache," one of them growled. "They killed your family, didn't they?" Eli raised his rifle, slightly not aiming, just holding it with the weight it deserved. "Maybe, or maybe someone like you just told me that." The silence that followed was heavy. "You let her go now," the sheriff said, voice low, "and this ends here." Eli looked at him with eyes cold as creek ice. "I let her go, and you put her back on that rope." Behind the rocks, I watched with her heart thundering. No one had ever stood for her like this, not even her own people when she was taken. The man, belly-grizzled, wounded, silent, was doing more than protecting her. He was reclaiming something of himself. "You think you can stand against all of us?" the sheriff snarled. Eli didn't blink. "No, but I'll still be the first one to shoot." The standoff stretched long. The riders hesitated. Some began to shift uneasily. No one wanted to be the first to test Eli's resolve. They'd seen what war did to a man like him. Finally, the sheriff cursed under his breath and yanked his reins. "You're gonna regret this, Cutter. We'll be back. And next time, we won't knock." They turned and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Eli lowered his rifle and exhaled. Aiyana emerged from the rocks, her rifle still in her hand. She looked at him, wide-eyed. "You didn't even flinch," she said softly. "I've already lost everything," he replied. "What's left to fear?" And together, they turned back toward the cabin, the rising sun casting long shadows behind them. Eli Cutter stood at the edge of his porch, long after the dust had settled, his rifle resting against the wall behind him. The men from town had ridden off, but he knew this wasn't over. This was just a pause before the storm. The sheriff would come again and, next time, he'd bring more than threats. Behind him, Aiyana swept the floor of the cabin, trying to busy her thoughts. She didn't ask questions, didn't try to comfort him. That kind of quiet understanding was rare, and it was why Eli hadn't told her to leave. He walked inside slowly, boots dragging against the wooden boards. "We've got maybe 2 days before they come back," he said flatly. She looked up, her dark eyes calm but alert. "I won't let you die for me." Eli poured water from a jug into a tin cup. "Then don't." She raised an eyebrow, confused. "Don't what?" "Don't let me die. We fight together, or we don't fight at all." For a long time, Aiyana didn't answer. Her people had never expected help from white men, especially not ones who'd lost family in borderland raids. But Eli Cutter, this grim, haunted man, was different. He didn't just carry grief, he wore it like armor. "What if they burn this place down?" she finally asked. Eli stared into the fire. "They already did once," he murmured. He hadn't told her everything yet, about how the first fire 10 years ago had taken more than wood and nails. It had taken his wife, his little boy. Everything that made him human. And when the town pinned it on a passing Apache raiding party, he believed it. He wanted to. It made the pain easier to hold. But now, watching Aiyana moving through his home with quiet strength, his certainty had begun to rot. What if the fire hadn't come from the people he hated? What if it had come from the people he trusted? Aiyana watched him closely. "What are you thinking? That maybe the wrong people paid the price for my pain?" She didn't speak right away. Then she said, "It happens more than you know." The fire crackled between them, warming the small cabin as outside. The prairie turned golden with the late afternoon light. After a while, Aiyana stepped to the door, looking east. "There's someone I need to see." Eli frowned. Now she nodded. "If this ends in blood, I need to speak to my uncle. He's not far. 2 hills over. He leads a small group of our people, ones who keep to the old ways. If anyone would come to our aid, it would be him. You sure it's safe? No, she said honestly. But I don't want to be a burden. Not again. Eli opened his mouth to protest, but stopped. He saw the fire in her eyes, the kind that couldn't be caged. Go before dark. Take my mare. She's fast, and you? She asked. I'll be here, hammering shutters and filling cartridges. She gave him a small, grateful nod, then wrapped a scarf around her shoulders and slipped out the door. Eli watched her ride away across the tall grass, her figure growing smaller as the horizon swallowed her. Once alone, he went to the trunk beneath the bed. Inside was a revolver he hadn't touched in years, wrapped in oilcloth and gilt. He checked the chambers, cleaned it, and laid it gently on the table. Then he began preparing. He boarded the windows, reinforced the door, and laid ammunition in reachable spots. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew how to survive a siege. He'd done it before, in another life, that as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long, the wind picked up. It carried with it the smell of dry earth and smoke of distant fire. Maybe, or maybe just memory. He stood in the doorway as darkness fell, a lone figure outlined by the flickering lantern light behind him. Somewhere out there, men were loading rifles. Somewhere, townsfolk whispered about traders. Somewhere, a girl rode to find family that may or may not help her, and somewhere inside Eli Cutter, the fire that had gone cold was starting to burn again, not with vengeance, but with purpose. The wind howled all night, pulling dust off the dry hills like it had a message to carry, one of warning, one of war. Eli Cutter didn't sleep. He couldn't. There was no telling when they'd come, only that they would. The cabin had become a fortress, windows boarded, lanterns out, rifle within reach. The smell of gun oil and wood smoke clung to the walls. He sat in silence, breathing slow, every muscle alert. He'd seen battles before, but this was different. This wasn't the army. It wasn't some nameless enemy. This was his own town, men he'd traded with, drunk beside, mourned with after the fire that took his family. He had no illusions how those same men had turned their fear and ignorance into law, and now they'd try to bury the last bit of truth left on this land. Aiyana. By dawn, his hands were steady but his mind buzzed. He stepped onto the porch as the first streaks of orange split the sky. The land stretched wide in all directions, the horizon trembling with light. Then he saw them. Riders. 12 this time, maybe more, armed and grim-faced, moving in formation. Across the grass, like a hunting pack, the sheriff rode at the front, dust rising behind them. They weren't here to talk. Eli stepped down off the porch and stood in front of the cabin, rifle cradled in both hands. His jaw was set. His eyes were hollow but sharp. He didn't speak. They stopped 20 paces from him. The sheriff's horse shifted restlessly beneath him. We gave you a chance, Cutter, he called. You made your choice. Now you pay for it. She's not here, Eli replied. The sheriff gave a cruel smirk. Then we burn it down. Anyway, send a message. You already did that once, Eli said. Didn't change a damn thing. You think you're a hero now, the sheriff snapped. You think siding with a savage makes you righteous. Eli took a single step forward. No, I think you're the savage. Clay, you hang children. You lie to widowers. And you're afraid of anything you don't control. That was enough. The sheriff raised his hand. Before it dropped, a sharp whistle cut across the wind. Then the earth moved. From behind the ridges to the west, shapes emerged, silent, swift, and painted. For war, Apache warriors, 20 strong, maybe more. They came in like shadows, surrounding the town riders before they even realized they were outnumbered. At their front rode Idana, hair braided back, bow in hand, face fierce with pride and purpose. The town men panicked. Rifles turned, horses reared, confusion bloomed like wildfire. One man reached for his pistol, but an arrow struck the ground an inch from his boot. Don't, Ayanna said coldly. You won't make it home. The sheriff looked at her, then at Eli, then at the circle closing around him. His confidence evaporated. You brought this on yourself, Cutter, he spat. No, Eli said quietly. You did that years ago, when you blamed the Apache for what you did to my family. The sheriff paled. I found your badge near the ashes, Eli continued. Buried under what was left of my wife's cradle. You thought I'd never come close enough to look, but I did. No one spoke. The wind kicked up again, scattering dust like ash. You killed them? One of the townsmen muttered to the sheriff. You killed his family. Clay Morton's eyes darted around. They were helping the raiders. I had no choice. Eli said, you had a choice. You made it. Now ride home and pray you never see me again. The warriors tightened their circle. The message was clear. The sheriff turned without another word. One by one, the riders followed him, leaving the land heavy with silence. Ayanna dismounted, walking slowly toward Eli. Her face softened when she saw the weight in his shoulders. You could have killed him, she said. I wanted to, Eli admitted, but you didn't. He looked at her. You changed that. She stood beside him, facing the rising sun. Around them, the warriors faded back into the hills, quiet as smoke. The battle hadn't come, but the war, inside Eli Cutter, it was ending. A week passed, then two. The sheriff and his men didn't return, not with guns, not with fire, not even with words. The town had been humiliated, their lie exposed, their confidence shattered, and for the first time in years, Eli Cutter's ranch stood untouched. But something else had shifted. It was no longer just his ranch. Ayanna stayed. She never asked, and Eli never said the words. But something unspoken passed between them in the quiet moments when she mended fence posts beside him, when he brought her water without asking, when they watched the prairie darken each evening, without fear of riders cresting the ridge. One morning, she found him standing in the burned-out ruins of an old shed behind the house. Charred timbers still lay half-buried in the ground, overgrown with weeds. He stared at them, shovel in hand. "This was my son's," he said, voice rough. "His little barn. He had a wooden horse inside. Burned to ash." She stepped beside him, saying nothing. "I never rebuilt it. Felt like if I moved on, I'd be betraying them." Ayanna crouched and touched the blackened earth. "But look," she said softly, pointing. "Even fire makes way for new life." There, growing stubbornly from the soil, was a small green sprout. Nothing special or weed, maybe, but it was alive. That evening, Eli brought down a crate from the attic. Inside were things he hadn't touched in a decade. A faded blanket, a small carved toy, the charred remains of a photo frame. He set them on the table as Ayanna prepared supper. "You never told me what really happened," she said gently, eyes fixed on the items. He sat down, hands folded. "I was out branding cattle. Took longer than I planned. Came home to smoke in the sky. The town said it was Apache raiders, that they'd seen tracks. I believed them, but I buried my wife with a knife in her hand," he said. "Not the kind she kept in the kitchen, a fighting blade. She was terrified of violence, wouldn't even gut a rabbit, but she died holding it. That never made sense to me." Ayanna reached out, placing her hand over his. "You saw the truth, eventually. Too late to save them," he said, "but maybe not too late to save yourself." Outside, the wind moved through the grass like a river of whispers. Ayanna stood and opened the door. "Come with me." They walked to the ridge above the ranch, the same one where the Apache warriors had appeared. There, waiting in the dusk, were 3 riders Ayanna's kin. Her uncle stood in the center, tall and weathered, with a face like stone and eyes like flint. "You called me an enemy once," he said to Eli in a low voice. "Now my niece says you are something else." Eli didn't flinch. "I was wrong. About all of you." The older man studied him. Then, with a grunt, he pulled something from his saddlebag, a bundle of seeds wrapped in soft leather. He handed them to Eli. "What's this?" "Corn, sunflower, medicine root, Apache crops. Plant them, not for us, for her." His eyes flicked to Ayanna. "And maybe for your boys, Ghost." Eli nodded slowly, the weight of the offering sinking in. "Thank you." That spring, the earth opened. Eli and Ayanna planted side by side, his calloused hands in the soil. Her songs carried on the breeze. The cabin filled with new light. Smoke rose from the chimney, not as a warning, but as a welcome. Strangers began to visit, not with rifles, but with curiosity. The town grew quieter, and beneath the rebuilt barn, where the child's toy once lay in ashes, corn pushed through the dirt, golden a live dot. One evening, Ayanna stood by the fence and watched the sun dip low. Eli joined her, brushing dust off his hands. "Think they'll come back?" he asked. "Who? The sheriff?" "No, the ghosts." She smiled gently. "They never left. They just stopped screaming." He nodded. The wind passed between them. No longer cold, no longer bitter, just a breeze over growing things.